Welcome to Programming with Professor Caleb. Today I'd like to talk about writing classes in Java. So in previous videos we've used classes to create objects, call their methods to get things done. Now we're going to talk about actually writing the classes that we use in those cases. So the elements of a class are first instance variables, sometimes called fields or attributes. So this is just the data that each object is going to contain and manage. Then we have constructors, which are a special kind of methods, code that initializes an object when we create it. And of course, when we've created objects, we've called constructors to give them the right information to set up our object for us. Then finally, we have our other methods, which are code that does something usually involving the object's data. And we've seen many examples of calling different methods from different classes. So I'd like to start by looking at the UML class diagram for the SavingsAccount class that we've used in previous videos. So the various parts of that, first of all, we have the SavingsAccount name at the top. This next section is devoted to showing us what those instance variables are. We'll see a couple of things here. First of all, this minus sign to the left indicates that this is private. Private means that it can only be seen by code that is in the class itself. The other thing we'll see here is that in addition to the name of the instance variable, we have a colon followed by the type of the instance variable, what kind of data this is. The next section is all of the methods, and the top of that is typically the constructors. So our savings account had 3 constructors, the default, one that took just the balance, and one that took the balance and the interest rate. We'll notice that over here, these have a plus sign. That means this is a public method, which is important for most constructors because we want to be able to create these objects and get them initialized. In order to do that from outside the class, we have to have a public constructor. Notice there's no return type on these because they are constructors, but we do have types on the various parameters that we're passing to those methods. Finally, we have the rest of our methods. These, in this case, are all also public. We see the name of the method, the return type. So getBalance is just going to give us what is the current balance of this object. So it's going to return a double because that's the kind of data that is stored in the balance. Something like deposit is going to be void because it doesn't give us back any data, it just changes the object. It does have a parameter, in this case of type double. We see that all 3 of these are void methods. So for this first experiment with writing a class, we're going to keep it a little bit simpler. So we're going to leave out one of these instance variables, just have the balance, do only one of our constructors, and then leave out the process end of month method. So let's go write a simplified version of our savings account. So let's start by creating a Java project, and we will put that in my video code folder, and we're going to go ahead and call that writing classes. So let's create a file SavingsAccount.java, since we want a class named SavingsAccount. And we're going to make that a class. And before we get going with the actual code, let's go ahead and create the class comment that we always want to have. I'm just going to describe this as a simplified savings account. Never forget your @author clause. Tell people who wrote the code. Now the first thing we're going to put in the class code is going to be the instance variables. In this case, we have just one of those. We're going to make that private because we don't want people from outside the class to access it. It's a double that we're calling balance. And that's all we have to do Declaring an instance variable is very much like declaring any other variable, except that we're going to have this what we call access modifier on it, typically private. Then the next thing we want to do is to create our constructor. We're going to make that public because we do want it accessible from outside of the class. The name of it, like we already know from using them, is the name of the class. And then we need that one parameter we were going to give it, type double, and we're going to call that starting balance. So then for code, what we need is to somehow put the starting balance into our instance variable balance. That's fairly easy to do. Just going to use an assignment statement. Balance is assigned starting balance. Now, I do want to mention something before we move on to the other methods. I might easily have called this starting balance just balance. Now, if I do that, I end up with an issue. You'll notice this is underlined in yellow and there's a thing. So let's see what the warning is. And it says the assignment to variable balance has no effect. The reason for that is that this balance, the parameter, keeps us from seeing the instance variable balance. So what we're doing is assigning this parameter to itself. Not very helpful. We can, however, solve this problem by using a special keyword called this. So if we say this dot balance, then all of a sudden we're referring to this balance up here. This is a special keyword that refers to the calling object. So that's going to be the object we use to call the method, or in the case of a constructor, the object we're creating when the constructor gets called. I'm going to go ahead and change this back to starting balance because I think that's a little more clear that this is the balance we are starting the account with. Notice I can leave the this there. It's not necessary, but it is permitted. I'm going to go ahead and put a comment on this as well. Always want to have comments on our methods that describe what they are and tell about any parameters and any return values. So constructor takes the starting balance, and we're just going to call this the initial balance in the account. So this @param stands for @parameter, and this will just be the name of the parameter followed by a description of the parameter. Okay, so now that gives us our instance variable and our constructor. Let's go ahead and make our first method. After that, we can go ahead and actually try to test this out. So our first method was getBalance. Again, we want that to be public. We want other people to be using it. It's going to return a double because it's going to give us the balance in the account. And then we're just going to call that getBalance. That's a standard way to name what we call getters or accessors that give us access to the data in our instance variables. Simply call them get, followed by the name of the instance variable in most cases. They almost always don't have parameters because all they're doing is giving us back data that we know about. We don't need to give any information to that. And the code is going to consist very simply of return, which is a special keyword that tells us whatever comes after this is what we're going to give back out of the method. So what data the method is going to provide to wherever called it. And we're simply going to say balance. Obviously, we could say this dot balance, but we're referring to this balance up here, the instance variable. Let's take a look at an appropriate comment for that. So we're just going to say getter for account balance, and we'll return the balance in the account. So this @return tells us this is a description of the value that gets returned out of the method. So now let's test out what we have so far. So let's go over to app.java. We don't really need to throw an exception. And let's get rid of the hello world print. And let's make a couple of account objects, savings account objects, and use them. See if that works. So savings account, account 1 is new savings account. So this works exactly the same as it does when we're using somebody else's code. And let's give that an initial balance of 500. And then let's do a second one with an initial balance of 1,000. Then let's go ahead and print out the balance in each using getBalance so that we can see whether or not we set those up correctly. So system.out.println, we won't worry about, well, let's actually label it account 1 balance, and we'll give that account 1.getBalance, so object.method, just like we have when we didn't write the classes ourselves. System.out.println, account 2 balance, and account 2 dot balance. Okay, let's run this and make sure that things are working so far with what we've done. And we see that we print, the first one is 500, the second one is 1,000. Looking good so far. Obviously, we haven't bothered with formatting our numbers because we're focused really on just getting that logic down. So let's go back to our savings account and write our next method. So the next method is our deposit method. So that's also going to be public. I'm going to make it void. And we're going to call it deposit. And it has one parameter that is the amount to deposit. Now that's pretty straightforward. We're going to simply add amount to deposit to the balance. Nothing can really go wrong for us here. Assuming that we got good data, we're not going to worry about checking to make sure amount to deposit is positive. So balance gets balance plus amount to deposit. And that's all we need to do because all we're going to do is add that. Let's go ahead and set up our comment. So in this case, deposit money into the account, and amount to deposit is the amount to deposit into the account. Okay, let's make sure that this works as expected. So we'll go back up here. One of the basic rules of writing code successfully is write it in small chunks and test each chunk as you go. That's one of the serious keys to success when it comes to programming. That way you know where your problem is if you have a problem, or it's at least very likely it's in that new stuff you just wrote. You do a good job of testing as you go. And that makes it much easier to find and fix than if you write a whole bunch of code and have several problems and then you're floundering around trying to figure out where the problems are. Okay, so account 1.deposit. Let's put $100 into that one. And account 2.deposit, we're going to put in a little bitty deposit of just $10.50. And then let's repeat our print to see where we are at this point and run that. And it looks like our deposit code works correctly. So now let's go back and write our last method, our withdraw method. So that, of course, is also public. Eventually, we will have some methods that are not public. But for right now, we'll focus on these are the actions that we want people to be able to do to use our classes. So this will be the amount to withdraw. Fix that. And here we do want to think a little bit, because if we just say balance gets balance minus amount to withdraw, and amount to withdraw is too big, then we could have a problem. Let's go ahead and throw an if in here. If balance is greater than or equal to amount to withdraw, then it should be safe to do the withdrawal. So balance gets balance minus amount to withdraw. Else, we're going to go ahead and print an error message. So I'm going to actually print that to system.error.println. That's a good idea for errors. Those usually show up in the same place, but there are ways to separate them. So it's good to get in the habit of using error if you're printing an error message. And we'll say withdrawal amount too high. Withdrawal amount too high. Too high. Amount balance unchanged. Okay. And let's do this final comment. Always important to have these comments. Just write them as you go, then you don't have to worry about it. Withdraw money from the account, and that is the amount to withdraw from the account. Okay, let's go make sure that this one works correctly. So we'll come in here. I'm going to actually attempt to withdraw too much money from deposits. So let's try to withdraw, or from account 1. Let's try to withdraw $601. So that should not withdraw anything. And then from account 2, let's just withdraw $100. So that should work fine. And then let's do one more set of prints to check what we have. And so if we go up and run that, we're going to see we have the originals, we have the result of the deposits. It said withdrawal amount was too high, balance unchanged, and we see that the account 1 balance is $600 still, but the account 2 balance is now $9.10.50, as we would expect. So that's what's involved in writing a class. Mostly, as always, this involves practice to get better at it. So I hope you were following along and encourage you to try out writing your own little classes. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you next time.